A young woman disappears under disturbing circumstances.
She said, God forbid anything happened to me. I love y'all.
When I tried to contact her, I couldn't get through.
We knew something wasn't right.
At first, her family's calls for help aren't taken seriously.
They looked at us like we were crazy.
We just took matters in our own hands.
The family was out there doing their investigation.
But a surprising witness will change the course of the investigation.
You can start telling me the truth about everything.
He gave us a lot of information regarding that night and what transpired.
He may not ever be able to get that image out of his mind.
Dealing with train tracks and dumping bodies.
And I'm like, wow.
Will justice ever be served?
He was on the run.
They were protecting him.
It felt like a movie, like it was not real.
You don't supposed to wish death on anybody, but this one time, I needed that to happen because he took somebody so special from us.
January 29th, 2021. It's a quiet Friday morning in Buffalo, New York, the state's second largest city, fondly known as the City of Good Neighbors.
Sometimes we get overshadowed by New York City, but with Buffalo, there's a lot of heart. It's not a small town, but it has a small town family feel. People tend to know each other, grew up together.
The reasons why it's called the City of Good Neighbors is because when a crisis hits, you will see your neighbors come to help you.
And one local family may soon find themselves in need of support.
It was about maybe 7, 8 in the morning.
Ronisha White received a video call from her sister, Tierra Lott. And when she saw her sister on the screen, it was obvious that something was wrong.
One side of her face was swollen.
Sierra, slow down. What's going on?
She just kept saying, I gotta get out, I gotta get out.
To 22-year-old Tierra Lott, family was everything.
It was really close. Talked on the phone every day. And mom first, but we joked and played, danced.
You couldn't see her and not see her sisters right behind her. Kids-wise, we was always together, sharing the same room. If I went outside, she had to come outside type of thing.
I've had moments of her just busting in my room, jumping on me, like that was my person.
To everyone who knew her, Tierra was the life of the party.
She was crazy, but she was a good crazy, though, like outgoing, fun, like talkative.
Tierra was always just silly, always cracking jokes on somebody.
She always made you laugh, made you happy.
But she also had a more sensitive side.
Tierra was a loving, caring person.
She was a sweetheart.
She will give you a chance with her heart on her sleeve. She always showed up when I needed her. She will give you the shirt off her back.
Although Tierra left high school early, education always remained important to her.
She ended up going for her GED at Urban League.
Soon after, she began a career in home health care.
Once she started doing the home care, she fell in love with doing that. She was just a workaholic. You never seen her.
When she enrolled in college to become a medical assistant, it seemed like a perfect fit.
It definitely was up her alley.
She put a lot into her schooling, and she always reached for the sky. She always wanted better.
And when she wasn't working, she loved spending time with her boyfriend, Andre Wiggum.
She met her boyfriend, Andre, through a close mutual friend.
She was happy, and he made her happy.
But Tierra wasn't only finding success in love.
She was about to start a new job.
She was really excited.
She definitely did have so much going for her.
Only now, Tierra has called her sister bruised and swollen.
I gotta get out of Okay, well, what do you need from me? What can I do?
I don't know. My stuff is already packed.
Oh, okay, well, what? Tierra.
She told me she had everything packed up, ready to go in the kitchen. She just gotta go.
But not long after, Ronisha received a worrying message.
She had sent a text message.
She said, like, God forbid anything happened to me. I love y'all.
Immediately, Ronisha texts her sister back.
I said, I love you too, but don't talk like that. But there wasn't no answer, no text back or anything like that.
She never responded.
What's happening?
22-year-old Tierra Lott was going strong with her 27-year-old boyfriend, Andre Wiggum.
He made her happy. She really loved him.
This was like her boot.
Tierra's professional life was also taking off.
She had just got that new job. She was excited.
But now, her sister Ronisha fears she could be in trouble.
When Tierra called Ronisha with a bruised face, she told her to leave from where she was. She said she was about to.
But not long after Ronisha hung up, she got an ominous message from her sister.
She had sent a text message stating that I love y'all and to tell everyone else that I love them too. When I tried to contact her, I couldn't get through.
And Tierra never texted back.
With rising concern, Ronisha begins contacting family members.
Yeah, I don't know. Something's wrong.
I reached out to my sister. I asked her, did she speak with her? She said no, she had missed calls from her, but she was sleeping at that time. I contacted my mother, explained to her what's going on.
Ronisha was saying that she can't get through to Tierra. That bothered me that day. We started calling, and we couldn't get no answers.
And that evening, the family decides it's time to take action.
She's not calling back. She's not on Facebook. That's when we knew something wasn't right.
The family assumed Tierra was calling from her boyfriend's place.
Thought maybe they got into it. You know, maybe her phone broke.
She had her own apartment, but for the last few months, she'd been staying over there a lot.
But her family doesn't know much about him.
I saw pictures of him and stuff like that, but I never got a chance to meet Andre.
We've never been around him. He don't be out anywhere we be out.
Which means they don't know where he lives.
We knew the street, we just didn't know the physical address.
But the family doesn't let that stop them.
We went over there searching up and down the street, trying to figure out which house it was.
The street is a really long street. It's like 4 blocks all the way down. This was a process.
We were knocking on doors, but nobody wasn't trying to give us no information.
Then they finally make contact with Tierra's friend who'd introduced the couple, who also happens to be related to Andre.
She knew what house it was.
She was pretty close with Andre, and if something was wrong, she wanted to help.
Moments after getting the information from her, Tierra's sisters are at Andre's front door.
We went banging on the door. There wasn't no answer. The door is locked.
Immediately, Ronisha calls Tierra's friend back, asking if she can help get them inside.
Yeah, can you get me into Andre's house?
She said, well, y'all, if y'all just come pick me up, then I can try to get y'all in the house.
Okay, we're coming to get you.
But when they return with Tierra's friend, they immediately notice something is off.
We get out the car. I said, hold on. They had a motion light. The motion light was working when we first got there. When we came back, the motion light was off, completely off. So I'm like, hold on, that's strange. Now the door is left open. So I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. That don't seem right.
Tierra! Andre! Tierra!
Tierra's sisters quickly proceed in the house.
Everybody turning flashlights on their phones so we can see what's going on. We're screaming his name and my sister's name.
Tierra! Andre!
Not only is no one inside, but they also find the house in disarray.
Everything is just scattered like somebody left out of there in a rush. I see the belongings that Tiara said she had packed up and ready to go in the middle of the kitchen floor. Now I'm panicking. Where is my sister?
But before Tiara's sisters have a chance to react, they're interrupted.
What are y'all doing here? We're looking for our sister Tiara.
She's trying to play like she lives here. This is her house. She's been living here for this amount of time.
Get out! Where's Tiara?
She said she never seen Tiara here ever in her life.
But if this woman is a roommate of Andre's, Ronisha is sure she is lying.
Not only are Tiara's things in that house, but Ronisha knew her sister had been spending the night at her boyfriend's house a lot.
So she contacts their mother.
My mom said to just grab Tiara's stuff and leave.
Within hours, the family decides it's time to get the police involved.
We went to the police, and that's the day that they sent the police officer over there to meet us.
They did a little welfare check, but, of course, no sign of her.
So tell us what exactly happened.
They say when they spoke with her via FaceTime, they did notice bruises on her face.
We showed them the text. God forbid if anything happened to her, that she loved us. That's basically what alerted us.
And you haven't heard anything since?
No, we couldn't get through.
We knew that she was in harm because she don't do that. She answer her phone. She don't go off of Facebook. She stay in social media.
But now she's nowhere to be found.
They said that the house is disarray and like somebody left in a hurry.
And she was staying here with her boyfriend. Can you tell us about him?
I mean, not much.
The family states they don't know Andre that well.
When she was with him, he'd be in the background. And I was like, when I'm gonna meet him? Or I tell her to put him on the phone and she'd just giggle, that silly laugh. Tiara kept him at bay.
For now, the police don't seem too concerned.
When you're a Black 22-year-old woman, they figure you're grown or what have you. So Tiara wasn't a priority from law enforcement.
But she is a priority to her family.
We know her. You can't tell us about our child. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't tell us anything.
Okay, well, let us know when you get more information.
So they take matters into their own hands.
Tiara's mom, Pat Davis, was a mother like no other at that moment. She was going to do whatever she could to find her daughter.
The family of 22-year-old Tiara Lott has contacted the Buffalo police after receiving an ominous text message from the missing woman.
They explained that Tiara was in a vulnerable situation.
On FaceTime, she had a couple of bruises and marks.
Tiara told her sister that she was going to leave the house, but then Tiara sent a message saying, if anything happens to me, I love y'all. Tell everyone else. And after that, no one could reach her.
But the family doesn't get the response they'd expected.
The police acted as if she was an adult. She might have left on her own for a couple of days.
Tiara's family can't help but feel the response might have been different if she were white.
Tiara being a Black woman, those cases often slip through the cracks. They don't get the same attention from the media, from the police, as white counterparts do.
There is disparities, the white women syndrome, where they make national headlines overnight.
We're gonna find her.
Desperate to find Tiara, her family begins an investigation of their own.
We just took matters in our own hands and did what we had to do.
It was us doing the footwork, us putting the flyers and everything.
We just got our friends together, people that knew Tiara, family help. We was on the phone a lot, trying to get into her emails. Definitely wasn't eating, sleeping.
We was outside searching through all these abandoned houses, train tracks, just everywhere.
Looking and looking, it was really hard.
The family has little luck. But when they ask the local church across the street from the house where Tiara went missing, they get their first break in the case.
The church had several cameras affixed to its building.
The church was helpful with giving us the video.
As they scroll through the footage, the sisters see themselves arriving to check on Tierra.
They can't get in, the doors are locked, so they leave to go get Andre's family member to help them get inside the house. As they go to leave, an SUV also pulls away.
While the sisters are gone, that same SUV returns and backs into the driveway. It stays for a while and then it leaves again.
That's when we come back and all the doors are open.
More concerning, though, is what they don't see.
Tierra FaceTimed her sister from inside that house. She's never actually seen leaving, but when the family finally got inside, Tierra was gone. So now they fear Andre took Tierra away in the SUV.
We should have never even left because that's what they was waiting for us to leave.
Despite what they've seen, the family tries to remain hopeful.
We still just think, okay, maybe he just jumped on her and he trying to just keep her hostage till the bruises and the swelling go down.
And they think the key to finding her could be inside the house from which she disappeared.
We got to get back into the house to see if it's anything that would help us.
When they return to the scene of the suspected crime, nobody is home, and it's surprisingly easy to get inside.
We got back into the house because the doors was unlocked.
But what they discover inside makes them far less optimistic.
Her coat was on the floor.
That's when I started to really like, oh no, he did something. Because it's wintertime. She not outside wandering around with no coat, no winter jacket on.
With new evidence in hand, the family meets with police again.
After what felt like forever for the family, police finally bring in missing person detectives.
Based on the information that her mother gave to us, we determined something possibly happened.
The detective reassures Tierra's family that their case is important to the department.
I'll make this one of my top priorities.
We were investigating. This was our top priority.
Even so, Tierra's family remains frustrated.
I don't feel like they were looking as hard as we were.
While police focus on tracking down Andre, the family continues their own search for Tierra.
Seeing runaway trafficked and exploited individuals, working with the intersex of domestic violence and homicide.
Well, thank you for your help.
Karima is impressed by Tierra's family's efforts.
The family did exactly what I would expect them to do. When you're looking for someone, it is very important to be persistent because we know that in our community, we have to advocate for ourselves.
Bury the Violence uses their expertise to help make Tierra's case more visible.
We become our own media. Everybody has to utilize TikTok, make this go viral. But we also have to remember that in the picture, in the heavy traffic areas, passing it out, posting it up is also another option.
Thank God for them because it put the pressure on, like, this is happening.
Before long, Tierra's story is all over the local news.
When you saw this mother go on TV saying, Tierra, if you're out there, mommy is here, we're gonna find you, that just hit the heart of so many people.
And the community comes out in droves.
The community was wonderful. People I didn't even know came out, searched with us for 2 days in the cold, 6-degree weather. People stepped up. It really helped. Really kept me grounded.
That's the city of good neighbors. They came together.
Behind the scenes, the police investigation is also picking up steam.
A family member of Andre's comes forward saying he wants to talk to police.
So, you have something you need to tell me?
He definitely felt guilty.
He couldn't take that pressure of holding back.
When I get over there, she's just laying there in a pool of blood.
After the disappearance of Tierra Lott, the only person of interest, her boyfriend, Andre Wiggum, is still at large.
They still wanted him for questioning.
But Buffalo police are about to get a big break in the case.
A member of Andre's family comes forward. Apparently, Andre had called him the night that Tierra went missing.
So, you have something you need to tell me?
Andre called me over.
Andre said something happened and he needed him to come to his house.
He was unsure what Andre wanted, but he showed up to help.
But when Andre led him to an upstairs bedroom, he wasn't prepared for what he saw.
Dang, man.
There was Tierra, dead.
He knew her. She was best friends to his sister, so he watched these girls grow up together.
Apparently, this had all started with an argument that got out of control.
I have to get out of here. I have to get out of here now.
During the argument, Andre got physical with Tierra. They parted to cool down, and when he was asleep, she packed her things. But before she could get out, he must have caught her and lost it.
And now Andre wanted him to help dispose of the body.
Dang, man. We gotta get some stuff. Come on.
He admits he went along with Andre's request.
Consider his state of mind or his perspective. My family member just committed this terrible crime, and now he's asking me to do something to help him. What happens to me if I say no? I thought that I knew who this person was, and now I don't. There's kind of like a survival response. I got to get out of here alive.
As he and Andre drove, there was little conversation.
First, they stopped and got some alcohol, and then they stopped and got trash bags and duct tape for the cleanup.
But when the men pulled back up to the house, it was clear they had a problem.
Tierra's sisters were there, so they sped off in the car, hoping the woman hadn't seen them.
And when they returned, the sisters were gone.
With the coast clear, they backed the SUV into the driveway and went inside.
But as Andre broke out the trash bags and duct tape, he felt a wave of panic wash over him.
Well, don't just stand there, man. Help me. I just can't, man.
He couldn't go through with it. He told Andre he'd have to clean it up on his own.
He doesn't know how much time passed before he saw Andre emerge at the top of the stairs.
Andre had Tierra's body slung over his shoulder, inside bags closed with duct tape.
He confesses that he didn't refuse to help Andre load the body into the vehicle.
It sounds like he tried to help as minimally as possible.
He was very forthcoming with us. He gave us a lot of information regarding that night and what transpired.
His story corroborates much of what police had already assumed.
By now, investigators had fully screened the surveillance video that the family had found at the church across from Andre's house.
What he told them seemed to match what they saw on the footage.
So, do you think you can give me the location and the address of where the body is located?
Yeah.
But what the detective really wants to know is where Tierra's body is now.
After a while, he did come up with a location.
Officers drive out to the area.
But when they look around, they find no sign of Tierra's body.
So the detective decides to get tougher.
So clearly you know you gave me some false information. So you have two options. One, keep lying, and I pin all this on you, and you go to jail for the rest of your life. Or two, you can start telling the truth about everything. So start talking.
Okay, I'll show you where she's at.
He finally gives them a location near some railroad tracks not far from Andre's house.
As they approach the tracks, police have good reason to believe Tierra is near.
He did become uneasy, shaken, and everything.
He started to kind of get this visceral, this physical reaction. As long as she was hidden, he was able to hide in that denial. But as people start to get closer, he now has to realize that I'm associated with something heinous. How did I do it?
When a family member of Andre Wiggum leads Buffalo police to where he claims Tierra Lott's body was dumped, it doesn't take long to find her.
She was found dead on their train tracks.
But if it wasn't for him, police may have never found her body.
That particular neighborhood, there is a lot of dumping that has taken place in that area. Trash, tires, so perfect dumping ground, I guess, some would say.
Although Tiara's body has been out in the elements for 2 weeks, she is still identifiable.
It was February, and the city of Buffalo is very cold. So her body was very well preserved.
Now police face the difficult task of notifying her family.
In the case of Tiara, me and another detective did go over to the mother's house.
They basically said body was found on the train tracks. And I just fell into my kitchen cabinet. And I'm like, wow, not my daughter, not my child, not Tiara. Not Tiara.
I just heard my mom just bust out in tears, and I just held her. I just held my mom.
It was really hard. It was really hard. Unbelievable.
After hearing what Andre's family member told police, Tiara's loved ones don't doubt his story.
He grew up around Tiara like a sister.
He definitely felt guilty. Probably was his sister getting in his ear, saying like, you need to come forward. Far as his role, I don't think he had nothing to do with what happened all until her last breath. And Andre made him help move my sister's body.
They're also grateful that he was brave enough to tell the truth.
At the end of the day, that's his family. He had to make a choice, and I appreciate the choice that he did make for us to find her.
And because of that choice, no charges are filed against him.
The location he had my daughter at, I wouldn't have never found her. I lived in Buffalo all my life. I never even knew that location existed.
While it's not the ending the family hoped for, they are relieved to have Tiara back.
Now we can lay her to rest peacefully.
Tiara, slow down. What's going on?
But making any sense of Andre's crime feels impossible.
What's going on?
This attack, I don't know where it came from.
I'll kill you.
She never came to us and said anything about him putting his hands on her or anything.
But in retrospect, there was a sign that something wasn't right between the couple.
We never got a chance to meet him.
I was concerned for that. Why we can't meet him? Why you don't let him come by and see the family? She just said, he always busy, he doing this, he doing that. It was always something, an excuse.
Building that wall of resistance and not being available to share with your family is sometimes a red flag.
There's a tendency to hide, protect the abuser. And somebody who's abusive, they would not want to be around family or friends of the abused because they know that the person's support network will sniff it out.
Her family suspects that embarrassment may have prevented Tiara from letting her family in.
She didn't want her mother to feel like she was being mistreated. She wanted her mom to always feel like she's still shooting for the stars, nothing is bringing her down.
There can be a lot of guilt and a lot of shame surrounding the abuse, which often causes people to keep it in.
Who you on the phone with?
And while no one knows what really happened behind closed doors, it's easy to imagine that abuse was happening all along.
It can start as something small, raising your voice, but that can escalate to physical violence.
And Tiara, like so many victims of abuse, stayed.
Victims kind of fall into this cycle with their abusers where they tell you that they're going to change. This won't continue to happen. Unfortunately, the abuser can be very manipulative, and it can be really hard for the victim to know what's real and what's not.
The fact that Tiara was trying to leave the day she was killed may have also contributed to the violence.
The most dangerous time for victims is when they try and leave an abusive relationship.
I have to get out of here.
Leaving someone who's controlling elicits kind of a panic response in the abuser. The abuser feels threatened. To him, strength is control. And if I don't have control, then maybe everybody will see how weak I am. So I need to shut you up, extinguish you.
When the autopsy results return, it's clear Tierra died a horrible death.
I read the autopsy, and he's the devil. Pure evil. Pure evil.
It was determined that Andre did strangle Tierra.
It takes multiple minutes to strangle someone. And during that entire time, you're looking at them in the face. You're watching the life leave their body. It's a very personal thing. He was definitely in a rage.
For Buffalo police, it's urgent to find this very dangerous man.
But police are still struggling to pin him down.
We had information that Andre may have left the state.
Desperate to find Andre, Buffalo investigators request outside help.
Buffalo police have no jurisdiction outside of New York State. So we enlist the help of marshals who have jurisdiction all over the U.S. So we brought them in, let them know what we have, gave them Andre's information, and from there they were able to help us search for him.
The family is grateful to see police finally making a more focused effort in Tierra's case.
Once they found her body, I do kind of feel like they were taking us more serious.
Nonetheless, Tierra's family remains deeply involved in the hunt to find him.
They wanted answers and started asking questions, and they were hearing that he's in the neighborhood, that he's driving around.
We found out that he was coming back and forth in Buffalo.
I was on the phone with the detectives and the marshals every day, giving them information.
But even with these new leads, authorities face serious hurdles in locating the suspect.
They believed the family of Andre Wiggum knew his whereabouts, and they were protecting him.
It was frustrating because Tierra's family felt like everyone was protecting this guy. Even that woman that supposedly lived in his house that kicked them out.
They also haven't been able to track him using cell phone data.
It seems Andre was changing out burner phones every so often, making it very difficult to find him.
In the meantime, with Andre still missing, the community remains on edge.
People are on alert, there's prayer, there's looking out for each other because we got to make sure we're all safe.
When someone is on the run and they've committed murder, they don't really have much else to lose. So if you do cross the wrong paths with them, I think it's valid to have some fear of what might happen.
More than a year goes by, and it seems Andre may never be found. But finally, he slips up.
Although he was smart about switching phones, there was an app he consistently used that the U.S. Marshals were able to trace.
After homing in on a Buffalo address, investigators stage a raid.
But when police enter the home, he's nowhere to be found. Andre escapes once again.
Roughly a year after Tierra Lott's murder, U.S. Marshals and Buffalo police believe they finally located their suspect, Andre Wiggum.
They had a house where he was hiding at.
But inside, there's no sign of him.
Police believe that he got wind that they were coming.
The near miss is a blow to the investigation and to the family.
Every day that you was out there getting away with something, you think you got one up and whatnot. It's like, that's not fair.
I did wish that on him. I felt as if I didn't want him to be found alive. You don't supposed to wish death on anybody, but this one time, this one time, because he took somebody so special from us.
But then, in May of 2022, Andre shocks everyone by turning himself in.
I think they had nowhere else to hide.
At this point, everyone knew he was wanted, and no one was willing to hide him anymore.
Knowing Andre is finally behind bars is a relief for Tiara's family.
I'm very happy that they did catch him.
I just wanted him to not be out here no more.
His arrest is also a hard-won victory for her loved ones who never gave up.
There is a sense of relief, a sense of accomplishments that we did it. Our efforts weren't in vain.
You have to advocate for yourself.
Fight for your child. Never give up. People turn their backs, close doors. Keep banging. Keep your foot on the ground and keep going. But if I just would have laid there, wait for phone calls, this would have never got solved.
As the case moves to trial, Andre's lawyer contacts the DA's office about a possible plea.
Prosecutors were open to reducing the charges from second-degree murder to first-degree manslaughter.
Trials like this, lawyers can be brutal in defending their client. Things that they can say in a courtroom to kind of throw doubt.
Although Tiara's family isn't sure the plea deal is the best option, it would have one advantage.
Maybe it was better if I wouldn't have to hear every single detail.
Sometimes it makes more sense emotionally to accept the plea.
With a deal in place, Andre faces sentencing in June of 2023.
Me and my family, Tiara's family on her dad's side, was there in court.
When given the chance to address the court, Tiara's mother fearlessly faces Andre.
Her words were, "Never in a million years would I think he would be the one to take her life. She really did care about this man. Why did you do this? Why did you have to kill her?"
But Andre chooses to remain silent.
The judge asked him, did he want to speak? He said no.
He showed no remorse. It was no apology. It wasn't nothing.
And when the judge hands down a sentence of 25 years, the family feels like it's a slap in the face.
He shouldn't have got that.
25 is not enough time for what he did to my daughter.
I don't consider it as justice.
Because for those who love Tiara, there will always be a void.
He took away a daughter, a cousin, an aunt, a friend.
One of the kindest people like we have around. Just an amazing person to have in your corner.
Birthdays, holidays, even just meeting up at my mom's house, having family time. It's always gonna be that missing piece that we can never feel, ever. He just snatched that away from us. Makes me angry, because she's supposed to be here.
She definitely deserved to be here.
We always gonna keep her name alive. We gonna be her voice for her.
And her family has hope that Tiara's story will help other women who may be in a similar situation.
Pay attention to the red flags. If a guy is trying to control you, pull you away from your family, that is some type of abuse. And it's just the beginning. Let your family know what you're going through. Don't hide it.
Be more open, letting your loved one know exactly what's going on, keeping them in the loop.
It's harder to share with somebody that you know. There are a lot of different resources that can meet you where you're at. Speaking with a therapist, there are lots of different support groups for women in toxic relationships.
You can call 211. It'll connect you to the local resources.
But, it's not worth your life.
On the afternoon of February 22nd, 1980, an apartment building on Via Monte Bianco in Rome looked no different from countless others scattered across the city's quiet residential neighborhoods. It was a place where ordinary routines unfolded behind ordinary doors. Parents prepared lunch. Students returned home from school. The sounds of traffic drifted in from the street below, blending into the familiar rhythm of another winter day. Nothing about the building suggested that it was about to become the setting for one of Italy's most enduring unsolved political murders. There were no warning signs, no crowds, no police vehicles waiting outside. Only 3 young men standing in front of a single apartment door, their faces concealed behind masks, waiting to be let inside. They did not force the door. They did not break a lock or smash a window. Instead, they pressed the doorbell and spoke calmly through the entrance. "We're friends of Valerio." It was a sentence so ordinary that it carried almost no reason for suspicion. The apartment belonged to the Verbano family. Valerio's parents answered the door, expecting nothing more unusual than one of their son's acquaintances stopping by. Within moments, the atmosphere changed completely. The visitors drew firearms. Valerio's mother and father were overpowered before they could react. Their hands were tied. Their mouths were sealed with tape. They were forced into a bedroom, unable to call for help, unable to escape, unable even to understand exactly why strangers had invaded their home. Then something happened that would later make investigators pause. The attackers did not search the apartment. They did not immediately destroy evidence. They did not flee after taking hostages. Instead, they waited. Minute after minute passed, in complete silence. Nearly 50 minutes. It was a decision that suggested planning, patience, and certainty. Whoever these men were, they had not come to threaten the family. They had come for one specific person. Behind the closed bedroom door, Valerio's parents could do little except listen. Bound and gagged, they could not warn their son that danger was waiting just beyond the entrance. Every sound from the apartment carried unbearable weight. Every creak in the floor, every passing voice from outside, every second that disappeared into silence brought one moment closer. They knew their son would eventually return home. They simply did not know when. Outside, life continued as though nothing had happened. Cars moved through the streets of Rome. Pedestrians walked past the building without noticing anything unusual. Somewhere, school lessons were ending. Students gathered their books and headed home. Among them was an 18-year-old young man named Valerio Verbano. He had no reason to believe that 3 armed strangers had already taken control of his family's apartment. He could not know that his parents had spent nearly an hour unable to shout his name. He could not know that every step bringing him closer to home was also bringing him closer to an ambush carefully prepared in advance. At approximately 1:40 in the afternoon, the front door opened. Valerio entered his apartment. What happened over the next moments would later be reconstructed through the physical evidence left behind in the accounts gathered by investigators. Rather than surrender immediately, Valerio resisted. According to the investigation, he fought one of the attackers. During the struggle, he managed to seize one of their guns. He attempted to move toward a window, perhaps searching for a way to escape or to attract attention. Before he could get away, one of the intruders fired. The bullet struck him in the back, passed through his abdomen, and caused catastrophic injuries. Valerio collapsed inside his own home. The attackers fled. Behind them, they left something unexpected. Although the operation appeared carefully organized, they abandoned several objects at the scene, including a suppressed .38 caliber handgun, a hood, a dog chain, sunglasses, and even a button. For investigators, these items would become some of the earliest pieces of physical evidence. Yet the significance of those objects would eventually be overshadowed by another disturbing reality. As the years passed, important evidence connected to the case would disappear, be lost, or be destroyed, creating new questions long after the gunfire had ended. Neighbors who heard the shot rushed toward the apartment. They freed Valerio's parents from their restraints. Emergency assistance was attempted as quickly as possible, but the injuries were too severe. Valerio Verbano died before he could reach the hospital. 3 days later, he would have celebrated his 19th birthday. His life ended before he officially entered adulthood. For many murders, the passage of time gradually replaces uncertainty with answers. Witnesses come forward. Suspects are identified. Trials establish responsibility. families receive at least a measure of justice through the courts. The murder of Valerio Verbano followed a different path. More than 4 decades have passed since that February afternoon. During those decades, investigators collected evidence, interviewed witnesses, examined political organizations, received multiple claims of responsibility, and revisited the case repeatedly. Yet despite years of inquiry, no individual has ever been convicted for killing him. The murder remains one of the most controversial, unsolved political assassinations of Italy's years of lead, a period already marked by violence, ideological conflict, and deep national divisions. As investigators looked deeper into Valerio's life, they discovered that he was not simply another student caught in a dangerous political era. He had spent years compiling an extensive personal investigation into Rome's far-right networks. Page after page, photograph after photograph, address after address, he documented people, connections, meeting places, and relationships that he believed formed part of extremist organizations operating within the city. That collection of information became known as the Verbano dossier. It eventually grew to approximately 379 pages containing the names of around 900 individuals associated with the far-right movement in Rome. Whether that dossier ultimately became the reason he was targeted remains one of the central questions surrounding the case. The investigation would also uncover another mystery. Months before his death, police had arrested Valerio and searched his home. During that search, officers seized his personal dossier along with other materials. Much of that documentation later disappeared from judicial archives before portions of it resurfaced. Years afterward, why it vanished, how it disappeared, and whether its absence affected the investigation have remained subjects of controversy ever since. The questions surrounding the case only multiplied. Multiple groups claimed responsibility. Some later denied involvement. A witness initially helped investigators create suspect sketches before withdrawing testimony, reportedly out of fear. Important evidence later went missing. A firearm abandoned by the attackers was eventually no longer available when renewed forensic examinations were requested years afterward. Piece by piece, the investigation accumulated uncertainties instead of conclusions. And so, more than 40 years later, the murder of Valerio Verbano continues to stand at the intersection of history, politics, and justice. It is the story of an 18-year-old whose life ended inside the place that should have been safest, his own home. It is the story of parents who were forced to wait helplessly behind a locked bedroom door while their son fought for his life only a few rooms away. It is the story of an investigation marked not only by violence, but also by missing evidence, conflicting claims, and unanswered questions that have survived long after many of those directly involved are gone. Above all, it is a story that begins with one ordinary sentence spoken through a closed apartment door. "We're friends of Valerio." Those words open the way for a crime that has never truly been closed. In the decades since that winter afternoon in Rome, investigators have searched for certainty where certainty proved painfully difficult to find. Before examining the murder itself, however, it is necessary to understand the world in which Valerio Verbano lived, a world defined by political polarization, ideological confrontation, and a generation of young Italians who came of age during one of the most turbulent periods in their country's modern history. Long before his name became associated with one of Italy's most enduring unsolved political murders, Valerio Verbano was simply another teenager growing up in Rome. Like countless young people of his generation, he lived in a city filled with contradictions. Rome was ancient and modern at the same time, a place where centuries-old streets existed alongside neighborhoods built for families seeking ordinary lives after the upheavals of the Second World War. It was a city of students, workers, civil servants, football supporters, musicians, and political activists. But during the second half of the 1970s, it was also a city increasingly defined by fear. Violence had become an unsettling part of everyday life. Political conflict no longer remained confined to debates, demonstrations, or newspaper editorials. Across Italy, ideological divisions had begun spilling into the streets. It was within this atmosphere that Valerio grew from a child into a young man. And understanding his life requires understanding the country that surrounded him. Historians refer to this period as the Anni di Piombo, or the Years of Lead. The name itself reflects the heavy presence of bullets, political violence, and constant tension that marked Italian society for years. The country experienced repeated clashes involving extremist organizations from both the far left and the far right, while law enforcement agencies struggled to contain escalating unrest. Political identities became deeply personal, and for many young Italians, ideological commitment was no longer an abstract interest discussed in classrooms. It became something that shaped friendships, determined daily routines, and, in some cases, placed lives in danger. The atmosphere of uncertainty affected ordinary citizens as much as political activists. News of violence became increasingly familiar. Public anxiety grew as each new incident reinforced the belief that the conflict was no longer isolated to small groups operating on society's margins. Instead, it seemed woven into the national landscape itself. For young people entering adulthood during these years, politics was not merely something observed from a distance. It was often experienced directly. Valerio Verbano belonged to this generation. He was born on February 25, 1961, in Rome. His family reflected a mixture of public service and political tradition. His father worked for the Italian Ministry of the Interior, an institution closely connected with the administration of the state. His mother worked as a nurse, dedicating her professional life to caring for others. The family also possessed left-wing political traditions, a background that naturally influenced the environment in which Valerio grew up. Yet reducing his childhood to politics alone would present only a partial picture. Before he became known through newspaper headlines or judicial files, he was an ordinary young man with interests extending well beyond political activism. Friends and those who knew him recognized someone whose daily life contained many of the ordinary passions associated with adolescence. Photography fascinated him. A camera offered the ability to preserve moments, document places, and observe the world carefully. That interest would later intersect with his political activities, but at its core it remained one of his personal hobbies. He also practiced judo and karate, disciplines requiring patience, concentration, and self-control. These martial arts demanded technical skill rather than brute force, emphasizing discipline as much as physical ability. Music occupied another place in his life. Like many young Europeans of the era, he listened to bands such as the Beatles and Pink Floyd, artists whose music had crossed national borders to become part of an international cultural landscape. Football also mattered to him. He supported AS Roma, sharing a loyalty that connected him with countless other supporters throughout the city. These details are significant not because they solve the mystery surrounding his death, but because they remind us that before becoming a victim, Valerio was a person with interests, routines, friendships, and ambitions beyond politics. It is easy for history to compress individuals into symbols. Once a crime becomes famous, the victim is often remembered only through the circumstances of their death. Yet Valerio's life was far more than the final moments inside his family's apartment. He was a teenager navigating school, hobbies, political beliefs, and everyday experiences in a city experiencing extraordinary tension. Around 1975, when he was approximately 14 or 15 years old, politics assumed an increasingly important role in his life. He became involved in student movements and joined the current known as Autonomia Operia, or Workers' Autonomy. This organization formed part of the broader landscape of left-wing political activism during the years of lead. His participation reflected choices made during adolescence. Within a society where political engagement among young people had become increasingly common, the supplied evidence does not describe every aspect of his activities within the movement, nor does it attempt to evaluate them. What is established is that Valerio actively participated in this political environment and that his involvement gradually extended beyond demonstrations or meetings. Over time, his attention became focused on understanding another side of Italy's political conflict, rather than limiting himself to participation within left-wing circles. Valerio began conducting his own private investigation into far-right networks operating in Rome. This project would eventually become the most discussed aspect of his life, and, according to investigators, potentially one of the reasons his murder attracted such lasting attention. Working independently, he started collecting information methodically. His approach resembled documentation rather than casual observation. He photographed individuals connected to the far-right movement. He wrote down addresses. He gathered telephone numbers. He attempted to map relationships between people, recording how different individuals appeared connected to one another. He identified locations where neo-fascist groups reportedly gathered. Piece by piece, page after page, he assembled information that he believed documented the structure of far-right networks within the city. The scale of the project was remarkable. What eventually became known as the Verbano dossier grew into approximately 379 pages. Within those pages were the names of roughly 900 people associated with the far-right movement in Rome. It represented years of personal effort carried out by a teenager who believed that documenting these connections was important. The dossier was not simply a notebook containing scattered observations. It was an organized body of material including photographs, addresses, telephone numbers, relationship diagrams, and information regarding meeting places. Whether every conclusion within the dossier proved accurate is beyond the scope of the available evidence. What remains established is that the dossier existed, that it was extensive, and that it attracted significant attention after Valerio's death. The existence of such a collection naturally raises questions about motivation. Why would an 18-year-old dedicate so much time to gathering this information? The supplied facts do not provide a personal explanation from Valerio himself. They tell us only what he did, not every thought that guided those actions. What can be stated with certainty is that the project required persistence. Collecting hundreds of names, taking photographs, recording addresses, and organizing information into hundreds of pages could not have been accomplished quickly. It reflected sustained effort over an extended period. As the dossier expanded, so too did its potential significance. It transformed from a private collection of notes into something that investigators would later consider an important element in understanding the circumstances surrounding his murder. In retrospect, the dossier became inseparable from discussions of the case itself. Yet before tragedy struck, it remained simply one aspect of Valerio's life, a project pursued alongside school, family, sports, music, and political involvement. Looking back from the perspective of history, it is tempting to view every decision as leading inevitably toward the events of February 1980. Real life rarely unfolds so neatly. At the time, Valerio was still a teenager living with his parents, balancing ordinary interests with political commitment in a country experiencing extraordinary instability. Neither he nor his family could know how dramatically the coming year would alter their lives. Before the fatal events of February 1980, another significant development occurred. On April 20th, 1979, police arrested Valerio while he and a friend were making Molotov cocktails. Following the arrest, officers searched his family's apartment. During that search, they seized several important items: a Beretta pistol, documents relating to far-right organizations, and the complete collection of material that became known as the Verbano dossier. The judicial process that followed resulted in a 7-month prison sentence. On its own, that sequence of events formed a completed legal chapter. Yet another controversy soon emerged, one that would continue to generate questions for decades afterward. After authorities had taken possession of the dossier, much of its contents later disappeared from judicial archives. Years afterward, portions of the material resurfaced within investigative files. But the disappearance of significant parts of the collection remained unexplained. The loss of documentation would later become one of several troubling features of the broader murder investigation. At the time, however, no one could yet know how important those missing pages might eventually become. By early 1980, Valerio Verbano stood at the intersection of several different realities. He was an 18-year-old son living with his parents. He was a student with ordinary interests in photography, martial arts, music, and football. He was politically active within the left-wing movement known as Autonomia Operaia. He had also spent years assembling an extensive dossier documenting individuals and networks associated with Rome's far-right movement. Following his arrest in 1979, that dossier had passed into police custody, only for much of it to later disappear before portions reappeared years afterward. Each of these facts would eventually become part of the story investigators attempted to reconstruct. After his death, at the time, however, they were simply the circumstances surrounding a young man preparing to celebrate his 19th birthday. No court has ever established exactly why he was killed. No definitive legal judgment has identified the individuals responsible. But before the gunfire, before the investigation, before the decades of unanswered questions, there was simply the life of Valerio Verbano, a teenager shaped by one of the most turbulent chapters in modern Italian history. Living in a society where political conflict had become part of everyday existence, and carrying with him a dossier whose significance would only become fully apparent after it was far too late. The events that followed would unfold not in a public square or during a political demonstration, but inside the apartment where he believed he was returning safely home. By the beginning of 1980, the life of Valerio Verbano had already intersected with politics, law enforcement, and one of the most polarized periods in modern Italian history. His arrest in April 1979 had resulted in a prison sentence. And during the police search of his family's apartment, officers had confiscated his Beretta pistol, documents concerning far-right organizations, and the extensive personal investigation that would later become widely known as the Verbano dossier. After serving the legal consequences of that arrest, life appeared to resume its ordinary rhythm. There was nothing in the available evidence to suggest that Valerio or his family knew that a carefully organized attack was being planned. Yet on February 22, 1980, events unfolded with a level of preparation that would later convince investigators this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but an operation designed around one specific objective. It was a winter Friday in Rome. The Verbano family occupied an apartment on Via Monte Bianco, an ordinary residential street where daily routines blended quietly into one another. Around midday, there is little reason for neighbors to suspect that anything unusual was taking place behind one apartment door. Parents returned home for lunch, students prepared to leave school, and the neighborhood carried on with the familiar rhythm of everyday life. At approximately 12:45 p.m., 3 young men approached the entrance to the Verbano family's apartment. Their faces were concealed behind masks. Rather than attempting to force entry, they relied on deception. They rang the doorbell and announced themselves with a sentence so ordinary that it offered no immediate reason for alarm. "We're friends of Valerio." Those few words were enough to persuade the occupants to open the door. Valerio himself was not home. Only his parents were inside the apartment. The moment the door opened, the situation changed instantly. According to the subsequent investigation, the three intruders drew firearms and took control of the apartment within seconds. Valerio's parents were overpowered before they had any meaningful opportunity to resist. Their hands were tied. Tape was placed over their mouths, preventing them from calling for help or warning anyone outside. They were then forced into a bedroom, effectively removing them from the remainder of the apartment while leaving them alive. The decision to restrain rather than immediately harm them would later become one of several details, suggesting that the attackers had arrived with a very specific target in mind. If their objective had been robbery, numerous opportunities existed during the following hour. If their purpose had been random violence, the attack could have ended there. Instead, something else happened. They waited. The silence that followed became one of the defining characteristics of the murder. Nearly 50 minutes passed inside the apartment. 50 minutes in which 3 armed intruders remained inside the home with 2 bound hostages. 50 minutes in which no gunshots were fired, no property was reported stolen, and no attempt was made to leave. Every passing minute suggested careful planning rather than panic or improvisation. The attackers appeared confident that the person they were waiting for would eventually arrive. Behind the closed bedroom door, Valerio's parents endured those minutes unable to move freely, unable to communicate, and unable to intervene. Bound and gagged, they knew only that armed strangers had entered their home and were waiting elsewhere in the apartment. They also knew something else. Their son would eventually come home. Every sound from outside the apartment carried unbearable significance. Footsteps in the hallway might belong to a neighbor, or they might belong to Valerio. The opening and closing of the building's entrance door could signal nothing at all, or the arrival they feared most. Unable to speak or escape, they could only wait while time slowly passed. Outside the apartment, Rome continued with its normal routines. Nothing in the available evidence indicates that anyone nearby realized what was unfolding. The street remained ordinary. The building remained quiet. Life continued uninterrupted beyond the apartment walls. Meanwhile, Valerio was making his way home. The evidence provides no indication that he had received any warning or sensed any danger. As far as the available facts reveal, he approached his family's apartment, believing it to be the same safe place it had always been. At approximately 1:40 p.m., almost 50 minutes after the intruders first entered the apartment, Valerio opened the front door and stepped inside. The confrontation that followed lasted only moments. Yet those moments became the central focus of every subsequent investigation. Unlike his parents, Valerio did not immediately submit to the armed men waiting inside. According to investigators, he reacted with remarkable determination. A violent struggle broke out between Valerio and one of the attackers almost immediately after he entered the apartment. The available evidence establishes several key actions during that confrontation. At some point during the struggle, Valerio managed to seize one of the attacker's firearms. This detail is significant because it demonstrates that the confrontation was not one-sided. Despite facing 3 armed intruders, the 18-year-old fought back. Rather than remaining under the attacker's control, he actively resisted. The struggle moved through the apartment. Investigators later concluded that Valerio attempted to reach a window. The available evidence does not establish precisely what he intended to do once he reached it, and any further interpretation would be speculation. What is known is that he moved toward the window during the confrontation, suggesting an effort to escape the immediate danger or otherwise break free from his attackers. Before he could do so, one of the 3 intruders fired a single shot. The bullet struck Valerio in the back. It traveled through his abdomen, inflicting catastrophic internal injuries. The wound proved devastating. Valerio collapsed inside the apartment. The violent confrontation that had lasted only moments was over. For his parents, the gunshot represented the only direct indication of what had happened outside the bedroom, where they remained restrained. Unable to see the struggle, unable to speak, and unable to intervene. They could only hear the consequences unfolding somewhere beyond the closed door. The supplied evidence does not describe every sound or every second that followed. What is clear is that after the shooting, the attackers prepared to leave. The operation that had appeared so carefully organized now entered its final stage. Yet despite the planning that seemed evident in the attack itself, the intruders made several unexpected mistakes while escaping. Investigators later recovered multiple objects abandoned inside the apartment. Among the items left behind was a suppressed .38 caliber handgun. Also recovered were a hood, a dog chain, sunglasses, and a button. The presence of these objects puzzled investigators. A crime that appeared meticulously prepared had nevertheless resulted in several pieces of physical evidence being left at the scene. Normally, an operation involving deception, hostage-taking, and a targeted killing might be expected to minimize such mistakes. Instead, investigators found themselves with multiple items potentially capable of yielding valuable forensic information. At the time, these discoveries appeared encouraging. Every abandoned object represented an opportunity to identify the perpetrators through physical evidence. However, the optimism surrounding those discoveries would diminish over the following decades as later controversies emerged concerning the preservation of evidence connected with the case. Those developments belong to the future. On the afternoon of February 22, 1980, investigators had not yet encountered those difficulties. Their immediate concern remained the scene itself and the young man lying gravely wounded inside his family's apartment. Once the attackers had fled, the apartment fell silent again. This silence differed profoundly from the one that had preceded the shooting. The earlier silence had been filled with anticipation. Now it reflected irreversible loss. Neighbors who heard the gunshot responded quickly, drawn by the sound of violence. They entered the apartment and discovered the aftermath of the attack. One of their first actions was to free Valerio's parents from the restraints that had prevented them from helping their son. The emotional impact of that moment is difficult to overstate, even while remaining within the limits of the established facts. For nearly an hour, they had been imprisoned inside their own bedroom, unable to protect their child. By the time they were released, the attack had already ended. Emergency assistance was attempted. Every effort focused on saving the critically injured teenager. But the gunshot wound had caused severe internal injuries. Despite those efforts, Valerio Verbano died before reaching the hospital. His death transformed what had begun as a carefully planned home invasion into one of Italy's most controversial unsolved political assassinations. One heartbreaking detail would later appear repeatedly in accounts of the case. Valerio died only 3 days before his 19th birthday. He was 18 years old. The milestone that would have marked the beginning of another year of life instead became a reminder of how abruptly that life had ended. The apartment on Via Monte Bianco immediately became both a crime scene and a symbol. Investigators documented the physical evidence left behind by the attackers. Family members confronted an unimaginable personal tragedy. News of the murder quickly spread beyond the neighborhood, attracting attention because of Valerio's political background and the apparent precision of the attack. Questions emerged almost immediately. Why had 3 armed men waited nearly an hour inside the apartment instead of confronting him? Elsewhere, why had they restrained his parents instead of attacking them? Why had they abandoned multiple objects at the scene? And perhaps most importantly, who had organized an operation so carefully focused on a single 18-year-old. At that moment, no clear answers existed. The investigation had only begun. Everything that followed would be shaped by the evidence collected during those first hours, by the statements gathered from witnesses, by the claims of responsibility that soon appeared, and by the mysteries that would gradually emerge as years turned into decades. What remained undeniable was the sequence of events established by the investigation itself. 3 masked men entered the apartment through deception. They restrained Valerio's parents and waited nearly 50 minutes. Valerio returned home at approximately 1:40 p.m. He resisted the attackers, managed to seize one of their weapons, and attempted to reach a window before being shot in the back. The attackers fled, leaving behind several items of physical evidence. Neighbors freed his parents after hearing the gunshot. Despite emergency assistance, Valerio died before reaching the hospital. Those facts have never changed. What has remained uncertain is everything beyond them: the identity of those responsible, the organization that ordered the attack, the significance of the evidence that later disappeared, and the unanswered questions that would continue to haunt the investigation for more than 4 decades. When the immediate emergency ended and the apartment on Via Monte Bianco became a crime scene, investigators faced a case that appeared, at least initially, to contain several promising leads. Unlike many targeted killings in which the perpetrators leave almost nothing behind, this attack had produced physical evidence, surviving witnesses, and a sequence of events that could be reconstructed with reasonable confidence. The identities of the attackers remained unknown, but their actions inside the apartment had followed a pattern. They had entered through deception rather than force. They had restrained Valerio Verbano's parents instead of killing or seriously injuring them. They had waited patiently for nearly 50 minutes, indicating that they expected their target to return home at a predictable time. During the struggle that followed, they had left behind several objects while fleeing. On paper, it appeared to be an investigation with multiple avenues available. Yet as the years passed, what initially seemed like a case that might eventually be solved instead became one of the most enduring mysteries of Italy's years of lead. In the hours following the murder, investigators carefully documented the apartment and collected the items abandoned by the attackers. Among the recovered evidence was a suppressed .38 caliber handgun. They also found a hood, a dog chain, sunglasses, and a button. Each object represented a potential source of information. Every item raised the possibility that forensic examination, witness identification, or future investigative developments might connect the evidence to specific individuals. The very existence of these abandoned objects appeared unusual. The murder itself suggested planning and discipline. The attackers had demonstrated patience by waiting almost an hour inside the apartment. They had successfully controlled 2 adults without immediately drawing outside attention. Their objective appeared highly specific. Yet despite this careful preparation, they had left behind multiple pieces of physical evidence. At first glance, this contradiction gave investigators reason to hope that mistakes committed during the escape might ultimately reveal the identities of those responsible. Beyond the physical evidence, investigators also began reconstructing the chronology of the attack. The timeline itself appeared remarkably consistent. Around 12:45 p.m., the 3 masked men entered the apartment after identifying themselves as friends of Valerio. They restrained his parents and waited. Approximately 50 minutes later, Valerio returned home. A struggle followed almost immediately. During that confrontation, Valerio managed to seize one of the attackers' firearms and attempted to reach a window before being shot in the back. The attackers fled, leaving behind several objects. Neighbors entered after hearing the gunshot, freed the parents. An emergency assistance was attempted before Valerio died on the way to the hospital. These fundamental facts became the foundation upon which every subsequent investigation would rest. Yet, identifying those responsible required more than reconstructing the sequence of events. Investigators also needed to determine motive, organization, and identity. Almost immediately, another complication emerged. On the very day of the murder, police began receiving multiple claims of responsibility. Such claims are not uncommon in politically charged crimes, particularly during periods of ideological violence. Some are genuine. Others are intended to create confusion, attract attention, or mislead investigators. Distinguishing between authentic admissions and false claims became one of the earliest challenges. In a Verbano investigation, among the first communications received was a claim from a far-left group. According to that claim, Valerio's death had not been intended as a murder, but rather as an accident during an attempt to punish him because he was allegedly believed to be an informer. This explanation immediately introduced uncertainty into the investigation. It presented one possible interpretation of the events while simultaneously raising questions about its credibility. Was the claim genuine? Was it an attempt to divert attention? Was it entirely fabricated? The available evidence did not allow investigators to reach a definitive conclusion. The claim became part of the investigative record, but did not resolve the central question of responsibility. Shortly afterward, another organization entered the picture. The far-right group, known as Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, commonly referred to as NAR, also claimed responsibility for the assassination. This claim attracted particular attention because it reportedly contained specific information regarding the firearm used during the attack, details that had not yet been released publicly. From an investigative perspective, such information naturally appeared significant. Knowledge of non-public details can sometimes suggest direct involvement. At the same time, investigators remained cautious. The existence of information within a claim does not automatically establish guilt, particularly during a period marked by political violence and competing narratives. The situation became even more complicated when later denials also appeared. Claims were made. Claims were questioned. Claims were withdrawn or contradicted. Rather than narrowing the investigation, the competing statements expanded the field of uncertainty. Even decades later, the supplied evidence makes clear that no judicial conclusion established the legal responsibility of any specific organization or individual. As investigators continued examining the case, attention also turned toward potential witnesses. One individual reported seeing 3 suspects near the crime scene and provided information that helped investigators prepare suspect sketches. At first, this appeared to represent another important lead. Eyewitness testimony can provide investigators with valuable direction during the early stages of an inquiry, especially when combined with physical evidence. Yet this promising development also deteriorated over time. The witness later withdrew the testimony, reportedly out of fear of retaliation. The available evidence does not elaborate further, nor does it identify the witness publicly. What remains established is that an account capable of assisting investigators became unavailable when the testimony was retracted. This development illustrated one of the recurring difficulties associated with politically motivated violence during the years of lead. Fear itself could become an obstacle to justice, whether justified or not. The perception of danger sometimes discouraged witnesses from maintaining cooperation with investigators. As years passed, the investigation extended beyond the immediate evidence collected at the apartment. Former members of far-right organizations and individuals cooperating with judicial authorities offered various statements concerning the case. Their accounts became part of the broader investigative effort to reconstruct what had happened and identify those responsible. However, none of these statements ultimately proved sufficient to establish criminal responsibility before a court. Some accounts conflicted with others, Some lacked independent corroboration. Others simply failed to satisfy the evidentiary standards required within the judicial process. Investigators accumulated information, but information alone could not replace legally admissible proof. This distinction became one of the defining characteristics of the Verbano case. There is often a considerable difference between investigative theories and judicial certainty. Investigators may develop hypotheses based on patterns, intelligence, or accumulated testimony. Courts, however, require evidence capable of establishing responsibility beyond the legal threshold necessary for conviction. Throughout the decades following the murder, this distinction remained central. According to the supplied information, investigators generally leaned toward the hypothesis that the assassination originated within neo-fascist networks. Yet leaning toward a theory is fundamentally different from proving in court. Suspicion, even informed suspicion, cannot substitute for legally sufficient evidence. While investigators pursued witnesses and analyzed claims of responsibility, another series of controversies gradually emerged, controversies involving the evidence itself. One of the earliest concerned the Verbano dossier. During the police search following Valerio's arrest in April 1979, authorities had confiscated his personal collection documenting far-right networks. That collection consisted of approximately 379 pages containing photographs, addresses, telephone numbers, relationship maps, and information concerning roughly 900 individuals connected with the far-right movement in Rome. After entering official custody, much of the dossier disappeared from judicial archives. Years later, portions of it resurfaced within investigative files, but substantial parts remained missing. The disappearance generated lasting controversy because the dossier occupied a central place within. Discussions of possible motives, whether its absence directly affected the investigation, cannot be conclusively determined from the available evidence. What is certain is that material once held by judicial authorities could no longer be fully accounted for. Questions naturally followed. How had the documents disappeared? Why had only portions later reappeared? Could the missing sections have contained information relevant to identifying those responsible? The investigation never produced definitive answers to these questions. The controversy surrounding the dossier was followed by additional concerns regarding the preservation of evidence. According to the supplied information, several important pieces of physical evidence connected with the murder were later lost or destroyed. The available material does not specify every item affected or every circumstance surrounding these losses, but the overall pattern became increasingly troubling. Each missing or destroyed object represented a lost opportunity for future examination as forensic science advanced. Investigations into unsolved crimes often benefit from technological developments occurring years or even decades after the original offense. Such progress depends, however, upon the continued preservation of evidence. Once evidence disappears, opportunities for renewed analysis disappear with it. Among the most significant examples involved the firearm abandoned by the attackers. Investigators had recovered the suppressed .38 caliber handgun at the crime scene, making it one of the most important physical objects associated with the murder. Years later, renewed forensic examination was requested. By that time, however, the weapon was no longer available within the evidence archives. The gun had disappeared. Its absence represented more than the loss of a single object. It eliminated the possibility of applying future forensic techniques that might have produced new information unavailable to investigators in 1980. Whether such testing would have changed the outcome cannot be known. The opportunity itself had been lost. As decade followed decade, the investigation accumulated an unusual characteristic. Instead of resolving uncertainties, time appeared to create additional ones. Physical evidence disappeared. Witness testimony became unavailable. Claims of responsibility contradicted one another. Portions of the dossier resurfaced while other sections remained missing. Individuals connected with extremist organizations offered statements that never developed into legally sufficient proof. Each new development answered one question only to introduce another. The murder investigation increasingly became an investigation into its own unresolved history. Despite these difficulties, the case never disappeared entirely from public memory. Investigators revisited it repeatedly over the years, examining available evidence, reconsidering testimony, and reviewing earlier conclusions. Yet every renewed effort confronted the same fundamental limitations. The surviving evidence remained incomplete. The judicial threshold required for criminal responsibility remained unmet. The passage of time complicated rather than simplified the search for answers. More than 4 decades after the events on Via Monte Bianco, several facts remain firmly established. 3 masked men entered the apartment through deception. They restrained Valerio's parents and waited nearly 50 minutes. Valerio resisted the attack, seized one of the assailants' firearms, attempted to reach a window, and was fatally shot in the back. The attackers escaped, leaving behind several objects. Multiple groups later claimed responsibility before conflicting statements emerged. One witness initially cooperated before withdrawing testimony. Much of the Verbano dossier disappeared after being confiscated by authorities. Important evidence was later lost or destroyed, including the handgun recovered from the crime scene. Beyond those established facts lies a landscape of unanswered questions that has never been fully illuminated. Who planned the operation? Who carried it out? Why did crucial evidence disappear? Why did the investigation ultimately fail to identify individuals capable of being convicted in court? Those questions would remain unresolved as the case moved from active investigation into the long and uncertain history of one of Italy's most famous unsolved political assassinations. The search for legal accountability would ultimately reach a conclusion unlike the one many had hoped to see, not because every mystery had been solved, but because the available evidence proved insufficient to transform suspicion into judgment. For many criminal cases, the investigation eventually reaches a defining moment. Detectives identify suspects, prosecutors present evidence before a court, witnesses testify, and a judge or jury determines responsibility. The legal process, regardless of its outcome, provides a formal conclusion, even when questions remain. A verdict establishes who the law recognizes as responsible for the crime. The murder of Valerio Verbano never reached that point. Instead of ending inside a courtroom with a final judgment, the case gradually became one of Italy's most enduring examples of the difference between investigative belief and judicial proof. More than 4 decades after the events of February 22, 1980, no individual has ever been convicted for the murder of the 18-year-old student. That simple fact defines the judicial history of the case. It does not mean that investigators abandoned their work. It does not mean that possible theories never emerged. Rather, it reflects a different reality, one in which suspicion, however compelling it may appear, never became evidence sufficient to satisfy the legal standards required for criminal conviction. Throughout the years following the assassination, investigators continued examining the available evidence. They reviewed witness statements, analyzed the physical evidence recovered from the apartment, considered the various claims of responsibility, and gathered information from former members of extremist organizations as well as individuals cooperating with judicial authorities. Each new lead carried the possibility of transforming an unsolved investigation into a prosecutable case. Yet each time, that possibility ultimately fell short of the legal threshold required by the courts. This distinction is fundamental to understanding why the Verbano case remains unresolved. Criminal investigations often produce theories that appear persuasive when viewed collectively. Detectives may observe patterns, identify likely motives, or recognize similarities between different acts of violence. Such observations can guide investigative efforts and help determine where resources should be directed. Courts, however, operate according to a different standard. They require evidence capable of establishing individual criminal responsibility through legally admissible proof. The burden is intentionally high because the consequences of conviction are severe. In the absence of sufficient evidence, suspicion alone cannot become a verdict. The supplied evidence indicates that investigators generally leaned toward the hypothesis that the assassination originated within neo-fascist networks. This assessment developed through years of investigative work and reflected the direction in which many inquiries ultimately pointed. Yet the existence of an investigative hypothesis is not equivalent to a judicial finding. A court cannot convict on the basis of general assumptions regarding organizational involvement or political affiliation. Responsibility must be linked to identifiable individuals through evidence capable of surviving legal scrutiny. In the Verbano case, that standard was never met. Several factors contributed to this outcome. One of the earliest difficulties involved the conflicting claims of responsibility received shortly after the murder. On the day of the assassination, police received multiple communications claiming involvement. One far-left group asserted that the killing had occurred accidentally during an intended punishment, because Valerio was allegedly believed to be an informer. Shortly afterward, the far-right organization Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, or NAR, also claimed responsibility, reportedly including details about the weapon used that had not yet been released publicly. Later, however, denials also emerged. Instead of producing clarity, the competing statements complicated the investigation. Determining which claims, if any, accurately reflected the events became increasingly difficult. In criminal proceedings, contradictory admissions do not automatically strengthen a case. On the contrary, they often require independent corroboration before they can be relied upon. Without supporting evidence capable of confirming the truthfulness of a confession or claim, courts remain cautious. The conflicting nature of the statements surrounding the Verbano murder, therefore, became another obstacle rather than a solution. Witness testimony also failed to provide the certainty necessary for prosecution. One witness initially reported seeing 3 suspects near the crime scene and assisted investigators in preparing suspect sketches. At first, this development appeared encouraging. Reliable eyewitness accounts have historically played significant roles in many criminal prosecutions. Yet in this investigation, that opportunity gradually disappeared. The witness later withdrew the testimony, reportedly because of fear of retaliation. Once the testimony was withdrawn, its value within any potential judicial proceeding diminished substantially. Courts depend upon witnesses willing to testify under legal scrutiny. When such testimony becomes unavailable, prosecutors lose an important source of evidence. The passage of time created additional challenges. Former members of far-right organizations and cooperating witnesses later provided various statements concerning the murder. These accounts formed part of the broader investigative record and contributed to continuing efforts to understand what had happened. Nevertheless, none proved sufficient to establish criminal responsibility beyond the evidentiary standards required for conviction. Some accounts lacked corroboration. Others conflicted with existing information. Regardless of their investigative significance, they did not produce the legally sustainable case necessary to identify and convict those responsible. Equally significant was the gradual loss of important evidence over the years. The investigation into the murder did not unfold within a static environment where every document and physical object remained permanently available. Instead, controversies surrounding missing material became an increasingly important aspect of the case itself. Much of the Verbano dossier disappeared after being confiscated during the 1979 police search, only for portions to reappear years later. Important physical evidence connected to the murder was later reported lost or destroyed. Among the most consequential examples was the disappearance of the suppressed .38 caliber handgun, recovered at the crime scene. When renewed forensic examination was requested years later, the weapon was no longer available. Every missing document and every lost object narrowed the possibilities for future investigation. As forensic science advanced over subsequent decades, opportunities that might have benefited from new technologies were limited by the absence of preserved evidence. Whether those examinations would ultimately have identified the attackers cannot be known. The fact remains that the possibility itself had been reduced. In many unsolved criminal investigations, technological progress creates hope that previously overlooked evidence may reveal new information. DNA analysis, improved ballistic examination, and advances in forensic techniques have solved cases once believed impossible to resolve. Such breakthroughs depend upon the survival of evidence. In the Verbano investigation, the disappearance of important materials meant that some opportunities for future analysis could no longer be explored. Consequently, the judicial process remained constrained not only by the evidence originally available, but also by what no longer existed. Over the decades, investigators revisited the case repeatedly. The persistence of those efforts reflected the significance of the murder within Italian history. The killing of an 18-year-old political activist inside his own home, in front of his restrained parents, continued to attract public attention long after the immediate political climate of the years of lead had passed. Each renewed review represented another attempt to determine whether the accumulated information might finally satisfy the requirements necessary for legal accountability. Yet despite those repeated examinations, no prosecution resulted in a conviction. This outcome illustrates one of the most difficult realities within criminal justice. Some investigations produce strong suspicions without producing sufficient proof. Some crimes leave behind numerous questions while refusing to yield answers capable of surviving. Judicial examination. The absence of conviction should not automatically be interpreted as the absence of investigative effort, nor should it be mistaken for proof that no responsible individuals existed. It simply reflects the legal conclusion that the available evidence did not establish criminal responsibility in the manner required by law. The difference between historical interpretation and judicial determination therefore becomes particularly important. Historians, journalists, and investigators may examine patterns, compare evidence, and develop informed assessments regarding likely responsibility. Courts operate under stricter constraints. They must evaluate admissible evidence according to legal standards designed to protect both justice and due process. In the case of Valerio Verbano, those standards ultimately produced no conviction. The judicial record therefore remains defined not by a verdict of guilt, but by the absence of one. This distinction has shaped public understanding of the case for more than 40 years. Discussions surrounding the murder frequently return to the same unresolved questions. Who organized the operation? Who entered the apartment on Via Monte Bianco? Who fired the fatal shot? Were the conflicting claims of responsibility genuine, misleading, or deliberately deceptive? Did the disappearance of evidence affect the possibility of eventual prosecution? These questions continue to exist precisely because no courtroom ever resolved them through a final judgment. For the Verbano family, the lack of judicial resolution carried profound personal significance. Valerio's parents survived the attack only because the intruders chose to restrain rather than kill them. They endured nearly an hour bound inside a bedroom, unable to protect their son, and emerged only after neighbors freed them following the gunshot. They knew how the murder had unfolded. They knew where it had happened. They knew approximately when it had occurred. Yet the identity of those responsible remained unknown in legal terms. According to the supplied information, both parents died without ever learning who had murdered their son. Their experience reflects one of the deepest consequences of unresolved violent crime. Justice delayed is often described as justice denied. But unresolved investigations create another form of suffering as well, the persistence of uncertainty. When no conviction is reached, every anniversary carries not only remembrance, but also unanswered questions. There is no definitive courtroom narrative to replace speculation. No judgment establishes responsibility. No sentence closes the legal chapter. Instead, the case remains suspended between established facts and unresolved mysteries. Thus, the judicial outcome of the Verbano murder is defined less by what occurred than by what never happened. No defendant stood before a court to answer for the killing. No verdict officially identified the perpetrators. No sentence concluded the proceedings. The investigation produced theories, controversies, recovered evidence, lost evidence, witness statements, withdrawn testimony, and decades of continued examination. Yet none of these elements ultimately combined into the legal certainty required for conviction. As a result, the murder of Valerio Verbano remains one of the most prominent unsolved political assassinations in modern Italian history. The legal process reached its limit without reaching its destination, leaving history to remember not only the crime itself, but also the extraordinary absence of a judicial conclusion. That absence would shape the legacy of both Valerio and the investigation for generations to come, ensuring that the case would be remembered not merely as a tragedy of the years of lead, but as one of the era's most enduring unanswered questions. More than 4 decades have passed since the afternoon of February 22nd, 1980. The apartment on Via Monte Bianco is no longer an active crime scene. The investigators who first documented the evidence have long since completed their work. The political climate that defined Italy's years of lead has become history rather than current events. Entire generations have grown up knowing that turbulent period only through books, documentaries, and the memories of those who lived through it. Yet despite the passage of time, the murder of Valerio Verbano continues to occupy a unique place in Italy's collective memory. It is remembered not because justice delivered a decisive conclusion, but because justice never reached one. Every unsolved murder leaves 2 separate legacies. The first belongs to the victim, whose life becomes permanently divided into the person they were before the crime and the symbol they become afterward. The second belongs to the investigation itself, which remains frozen between what is known and what can never be fully proven. In the case of Valerio Verbano, those 2 legacies have become inseparable. His name no longer appears only in judicial files or newspaper archives. Instead, it has become part of Italy's broader historical memory surrounding the violence of the years of lead and the continuing search for truth in cases that remain unresolved. Long before becoming a symbol, however, Valerio was simply an 18-year-old living an ordinary life within extraordinary circumstances. He was a son who returned home expecting to find his parents waiting inside. He enjoyed photography, practicing judo and karate, listening to the Beatles and Pink Floyd, and supporting AS Roma. Those ordinary interests often risk disappearing beneath the weight of political history. Yet they remain essential to understanding who he was. Crimes of this nature have a tendency to transform victims into representations of larger conflicts. The individual gradually disappears behind the symbolism. Remembering Valerio requires resisting that tendency. His political involvement formed an important part of his life, but it did not define the entirety of his identity. He was also a young man with personal interests, family relationships, and a future that ended only 3 days before his 19th birthday. At the same time, history has undeniably given his name a significance extending beyond his personal story. According to the available information, Valerio Verbano has become a symbol of anti-fascist memory in Italy. Across Rome and in other cities, public places, awards, and commemorative activities bear his name. Each year, on February 22nd, people gather to remember both the young man who lost his life and the unresolved questions surrounding his murder. These commemorations do not celebrate violence or political conflict. Instead, they serve as reminders that the passage of time should not erase unresolved injustice. Every annual remembrance reflects the belief that unanswered questions deserve continued attention. Even when decades have passed since the original crime, memory, in this sense, becomes a form of persistence. It refuses to allow unresolved cases to disappear simply because they have grown old. The annual commemorations also highlight another reality often overlooked in discussions of unsolved crimes. A criminal investigation may eventually slow, evidence may become more difficult to obtain, and witnesses may become harder to locate, but grief does not follow the same timetable. For families, anniversaries rarely represent the closing of emotional wounds. Instead, they often renew awareness of what remains missing. The Verbano family carried that burden throughout the decades that followed the murder. Few aspects of this case are as heartbreaking as the experience endured by Valerio's parents. They survived the attack physically, yet they were placed in circumstances almost impossible to imagine. Bound and gagged inside their own bedroom, they knew armed men had entered their home. They understood that something dangerous was unfolding only a short distance away. They also knew their son would eventually return. During nearly 50 minutes of waiting, they possessed no ability to warn him. Every passing minute increased their fear while leaving them completely powerless to intervene. Then came the sound of the struggle, then the gunshot. By the time neighbors reached the apartment and freed them, the attack had already ended. Emergency assistance was underway, but the injuries inflicted upon Valerio proved fatal before he reached the hospital. The supplied information tells us one final detail that gives lasting emotional weight to the story. Valerio's parents both died without ever learning who killed their son. Their lives, therefore, remained permanently connected to uncertainty. They knew how the crime occurred. They knew where it happened. They knew approximately when it happened. Yet they never received the answer to the question every bereaved parent naturally asks. Who was responsible? That absence of certainty distinguishes unresolved murders from those ending in conviction. In many criminal cases, a verdict cannot erase grief, but it can establish an official account of responsibility. It answers at least one fundamental question. In the Verbano case, that answer never came. The uncertainty survived not only the investigation, but also the lifetimes of those who suffered, most directly from the crime. Another lasting legacy concerns the Verbano dossier itself. Long before the murder, Valerio had spent years compiling information concerning individuals and networks associated with the far-right movement in Rome. Approximately 379 pages containing photographs, addresses, telephone numbers, relationship maps, and around 900 names eventually became known collectively as the Verbano dossier. Following his arrest in 1979, authorities confiscated that material. Much of it later disappeared from judicial archives before portions resurfaced years afterward. Whether the dossier directly motivated the assassination remains legally unproven. Nevertheless, its existence became one of the defining elements of the case. It represented both Valerio's determination to document what he believed was important and one of the investigation's most persistent controversies. The disappearance of much of that documentation reinforced broader concerns surrounding the handling of evidence. The dossier was not the only element that became unavailable over time. According to the supplied information, important physical evidence connected to the investigation was also lost or destroyed, including the suppressed .38 caliber handgun recovered at the crime scene. These developments ensured that the mystery surrounding the murder extended beyond identifying the attackers. Questions also emerged concerning why significant evidence vanished and how those losses affected future investigative possibilities. The result was a case remembered not only for the violence that ended a young man's life, but also for the unresolved uncertainties that accumulated afterward. As years became decades, the murder increasingly came to symbolize the difficulties of seeking justice when evidence disappears. Testimony changes, and time steadily erodes opportunities for certainty. The investigation into Valerio's death illustrates a broader truth about criminal justice. Time is not always an ally. While advances in forensic science have solved many historic cases, those advances depend upon the survival of evidence. When crucial documents vanish or physical evidence is lost, technological progress cannot recover what no longer exists. In the Verbano case, investigators repeatedly returned to the available material. Yet each renewed examination confronted the same limitations created by missing evidence and insufficient proof. Consequently, the legal outcome remained unchanged despite continuing interest in the case. The murder therefore occupies a distinctive position within Italy's historical memory. It is remembered simultaneously as a personal tragedy, a political assassination, and an unresolved investigation. Those three dimensions cannot easily be separated. Remove any one of them, and the story becomes incomplete. It is the combination of all three that explains why the case continues to attract attention after more than 40 years. The broader historical setting also remains impossible to ignore. Valerio lived during one of the most polarized periods in modern Italian history. The years of lead witnessed violence involving extremist organizations from both the far left and the far right, creating an atmosphere in which ideological conflict frequently extended beyond speeches and demonstrations. Within that environment, individual lives were often shaped by forces much larger than themselves. Valerio's murder became one of the many tragedies emerging from that period. It also became one of the few whose unanswered questions continue to resonate so strongly decades later. Throughout this story, certain facts have remained constant despite every controversy. 3 masked men entered the apartment by pretending to be Valerio's friends. They restrained his parents and waited nearly 50 minutes. Valerio returned home, resisted the attackers, seized one of their firearms, attempted to reach a window, and was fatally shot in the back. The attackers fled, abandoning several objects. Investigators received conflicting claims of responsibility. A witness later withdrew testimony, reportedly out of fear. Much of the Verbano dossier disappeared after being confiscated. Important evidence was subsequently lost or destroyed. Investigators generally leaned toward the hypothesis of neo-fascist involvement, but never obtained sufficient legal proof to secure conviction. These established facts form the framework within which every discussion of the case must remain. Beyond them lie questions that have resisted definitive answers for more than 4 decades. Who planned the operation? Who carried it out? Why did the evidence disappear? Why did no prosecution ever establish legal responsibility? Those questions remain open because the available evidence has never closed them. The story, therefore, ends where every unsolved investigation ultimately ends, not with certainty, but with absence. The absence of a verdict. The absence of complete evidence. The absence of names attached to legal responsibility. Yet there is another absence that perhaps carries even greater weight. It is the absence left within one family by the loss of an 18-year-old son who never had the opportunity to celebrate his 19th birthday. History often remembers famous crimes through their mysteries. Headlines emphasize the unanswered questions, the missing evidence, the unknown perpetrators. Those elements are undeniably important, but they should never eclipse the person at the center of the story. Before there was a dossier, before there were judicial files, before there were competing claims of responsibility and decades of investigation, there was simply a young man returning home on an ordinary Friday afternoon. He opened the door to the place where he expected to be safest. Instead, he walked into a carefully prepared ambush from which he would never leave alive. More than 40 years later, the investigation remains unfinished. But memory has refused to disappear. Each annual commemoration, each renewed discussion, and each effort to examine the surviving evidence reflects the same enduring conviction that the passage of time should never erase the search for truth. Whether the unanswered questions surrounding the murder of Valerio Verbano will ever receive definitive legal answers remains unknown. What is certain is that his name continues to endure, not because the case was solved, but because it was not. His story remains one of the most haunting reminders that history is sometimes defined as much by the questions it cannot answer as by the answers it eventually finds. More than 40 years after the murder of Valerio Verbano, the case remains suspended between memory and uncertainty. It is a rare kind of tragedy, one in which the passage of time has not brought the traditional conclusion expected from a criminal investigation. There's been no final courtroom declaration identifying the killers. There's been no sentence that could mark the official end of the search for responsibility. There's been no moment in which a judge's decision transformed years of questions into a definitive historical record. Instead, the name of Valerio Verbano has continued to exist alongside an unresolved absence, the absence of answers, the absence of justice in legal terms, and the absence of a complete explanation for how an 18-year-old young man became the victim of a carefully planned political assassination inside his own home. Yet the story of Valerio Verbano has never been defined only by the people who killed him or by the unanswered questions surrounding his death. Over time, it has also become a story about memory, about the importance of preserving history, and about the responsibility to remember those whose lives were interrupted by political violence. The apartment on Via Monte Bianco remains the place where the tragedy occurred. But Valerio's legacy extends far beyond that single location. His name has become connected with discussions about Italy's years of lead, a period when ideological conflict reached a level of violence that affected entire generations. In remembering him, many people are not only remembering one murder. They are remembering a historical era in which political divisions could turn into deadly confrontations, where young people became involved in movements on opposite sides of the ideological spectrum, and where many crimes remain surrounded by unanswered questions. The circumstances of Valerio's death continue to make the case especially painful. He was not killed in a distant confrontation or in an unpredictable moment of public violence. He was attacked in the place where people are normally expected to feel safest, their own home. The attackers entered by deception, using the simple statement that they were friends of Valerio. They restrained his parents and waited for him to return. When he arrived, he fought back. He attempted to resist those who had entered his home. He managed to take one of their weapons. He tried to reach a window before a bullet struck him in the back. Those final moments reveal something important about the person at the center of the story. Valerio was not simply a name attached to a political controversy. He was a young man who reacted when faced with danger. He resisted. He attempted to survive. His death was not only the loss of a politically active teenager, it was the loss of a son, a friend, and a person whose future ended before it had truly begun. The tragedy was also carried by his parents, who experienced one of the most devastating forms of helplessness imaginable. They were alive, present, and only a few rooms away, yet they were prevented from protecting their child, bound and unable to call for help. They were forced to wait while the attackers controlled the apartment. The gunshot that ended Valerio's life also marked the beginning of decades of uncertainty for them. They knew their son had been murdered. They knew the circumstances of the attack, but they never received the answer that every family affected by such violence hopes to receive: the identity of those responsible. Their experience represents one of the most painful consequences of unresolved crimes. The absence of a conviction does not only affect legal records, it affects human lives. It leaves families carrying questions that cannot be answered and memories that cannot be placed into a final chapter. The investigation into Valerio's murder also remains a reminder that justice depends not only on determination, but on the preservation of truth. In this case, some of the most important elements of the investigation became surrounded by controversy. The Verbano dossier. The collection of information Valerio had spent years compiling about far-right networks in Rome disappeared after being taken into police custody and later resurfaced only partially. Important physical evidence was also lost or destroyed over time, including the suppressed .38 caliber handgun recovered from the crime scene. These losses created additional barriers for investigators and contributed to the enduring mystery surrounding the case. Every criminal investigation depends on evidence. Evidence provides a bridge between what happened and what can be proven. When that bridge weakens, the distance between suspicion and certainty becomes impossible to cross. The Verbano case demonstrates how fragile that process can be. A crime may be remembered for decades. Investigators may continue searching, and society may continue demanding answers, but without sufficient evidence. The legal system cannot always provide the conclusion people seek. This does not eliminate the importance of the search. Instead, it highlights why the preservation of evidence, the protection of witnesses, and the careful handling of investigations are essential parts of justice. Throughout the years, theories surrounding Valerio's murder have remained connected to the political environment in which he lived and died. Investigators generally considered the possibility that the assassination originated from neo-fascist networks, based on the broader circumstances surrounding the case. However, no individual was ever legally convicted. This distinction remains central. History may examine possibilities, patterns, and context. Investigations may develop theories based on available information, but courts require proof. The tragedy of the Verbano case is that despite decades of attention, that final legal certainty was never achieved. The case therefore continues to exist in a space between what many believe happened and what can be officially proven. For many people who remember Valerio today, his name represents a demand that unresolved crimes should not simply disappear with time. The annual commemorations held on February 22nd reflect this idea. They serve as moments of remembrance, but also as reminders that history requires attention. The passage of decades can make events feel distant, but distance does not erase their significance. Every generation inherits the responsibility of understanding the events that shaped the society before it. The murder of Valerio Verbano remains part of that historical responsibility. At the same time, remembering Valerio means remembering more than the circumstances of his death. It means remembering the person who existed before the tragedy. The teenager who enjoyed music by the Beatles and Pink Floyd. The young supporter of AS Roma. The person interested in photography and martial arts. The son of a family with its own traditions and values. These details matter because they restore humanity to a story that could otherwise become reduced to Politics and violence. A person should never be remembered only through the moment they were lost. They should also be remembered through the life they lived. The unanswered nature of the case has made Valerio's story endure. But it is not the mystery alone that gives the story meaning. Mysteries attract attention, but memory creates responsibility. The important question is not only who committed the crime, but also what society chooses to remember after the crime remains unresolved. In Valerio's case, remembrance has become a way of refusing to allow an unfinished investigation to become a forgotten one. The murder of Valerio Verbano remains one of Italy's most controversial unsolved political assassinations. It represents the violence of the years of lead, the difficulties of pursuing justice decades after a crime, and the lasting consequences of unanswered questions. But above all, it remains the story of a young man whose life was taken too soon. On February 22, 1980, an 18-year-old returned home and encountered a danger he could never have expected. Within minutes, his future disappeared. More than 4 decades later, the search for complete truth continues. The names of those responsible remain unknown in legal terms. The questions remain open. The investigation remains unfinished. But Valerio Verbano's memory has survived. His story continues to be told because some losses cannot be measured only by whether a case is solved. Some lives remain significant because of the questions they leave behind, the lessons they represent, and the determination of those who continue to seek understanding. The final chapter of the Valerio Verbano case has never been written by a court. It remains written instead through memory, history, and the enduring hope that one day the unanswered questions surrounding his death may finally find their answers. Until then, the name Valerio Verbano remains a reminder of both a tragedy that should never have happened and a search for truth that has never completely ended. The story of Valerio Verbano does not end with the failure to obtain a conviction. In many ways, that absence of a legal conclusion became the reason the case continued to occupy a place in Italy's historical memory. Some crimes disappear from public attention as years pass, especially when investigations reach a dead end. The case of Valerio Verbano followed a different path. Instead of fading away, it remained present because the questions surrounding it were never fully answered. The lack of a final judicial explanation transformed the murder into a lasting symbol of the unresolved wounds left by the years of lead. It became a case discussed not only because of the violence that occurred inside an apartment in Rome on February 22, 1980, but because of everything that followed: the search for evidence, the conflicting statements, the missing materials, and the decades-long absence of a definitive account of responsibility. At the center of this story remains a simple but powerful reality. An 18-year-old young man lost his life, and those responsible were never legally identified. When examining a case that has remained unresolved for so long, it is important to separate what is known from what remains uncertain. The known facts form a clear and painful sequence. 3 masked individuals entered the Verbano family apartment by claiming to be friends of Valerio. They restrained his parents and waited for him to return. When Valerio arrived, he confronted them. He resisted. He managed to seize one of their weapons. He attempted to move toward a window before being shot in the back. The attackers escaped, leaving behind several objects that became part of the investigation. Neighbors arrived after hearing the gunshot. Valerio was assisted but died before reaching the hospital. These facts have remained consistent throughout the decades. What remains unresolved is the identity of the attackers and the full explanation behind the operation. The unanswered questions surrounding the murder have always been closely connected to the political environment of the time. The years of lead created a situation in which violence between extremist groups from opposing Ideological backgrounds became a defining feature of Italian society. Within this atmosphere, the murder of a young activist could not be viewed separately from the broader conflict surrounding him. Valerio had been involved in the left-wing movement Autonomia Operaia from his teenage years. He had also devoted considerable effort to documenting far-right networks in Rome through the collection that later became known as the Verbano dossier. These elements became central to discussions about possible motives, but they never produced a definitive legal conclusion. The investigation suggested possible connections and raised serious questions. Yet the evidence required for a conviction was never established. This difference between historical interpretation and legal proof remains one of the most important aspects of the case. A society may remember, analyze, and debate a crime for decades. But a court requires something more specific, evidence capable of proving individual responsibility. In the case of Valerio Verbano, that final step was never achieved. The investigation was also shaped by the disappearance of important materials. The Verbano dossier, which represented years of Valerio's personal research into far-right circles, became one of the most controversial elements of the case after much of it disappeared following its seizure by authorities. Parts of the dossier later resurfaced, but not everything was recovered. The loss of such material contributed to continuing questions about what information may have been available and how it might have affected the investigation. Similarly, the disappearance of important physical evidence, including the firearm recovered at the crime scene, created additional difficulties. These losses became part of the history of the case itself. They represented not only missing objects or documents, but also lost possibilities. Once evidence disappears, future investigations cannot benefit from technologies or methods that may not have existed at the time of the original crime. The passage of time can bring new opportunities, but only if the foundations of an investigation remain intact. Another lasting element of the case is the role of fear and silence. One witness who initially provided information to investigators later withdrew the testimony, reportedly because of fear of retaliation. This detail reflects one of the challenges often present in politically sensitive crimes. Investigations depend not only on evidence, but also on people willing to provide information and stand behind their statements. When witnesses lose the ability or willingness to continue cooperating, important paths of inquiry may disappear. The case of Valerio Verbano demonstrates how difficult it can be to achieve justice when uncertainty surrounds both evidence and testimony. The passage of time also changed the relationship between the case and the public. In the years immediately following the murder, the investigation existed within the intense political atmosphere of the period. Later generations encountered the case through historical discussion, commemorations, and efforts to preserve memory. For those who remember the years of lead, Valerio Verbano represents a personal and political tragedy connected to a violent era. For younger generations, his story serves as a reminder of how unresolved events from the past can continue influencing the present. Remembering such cases is not only about looking backward, it is also about understanding how societies confront periods of conflict and how they respond when justice remains incomplete. The continued remembrance of Valerio Verbano is closely tied to the belief that an unresolved crime should not become an erased crime. Each year, commemorations held in his name reflect a continuing demand for recognition and truth. These moments are not simply about recalling the circumstances of his death. They are also about preserving the memory of the person he was before becoming a symbol. Valerio's life contained ordinary elements that are easy to overlook when a person becomes associated with a famous case. He enjoyed music, sports, photography, and martial arts. He was a young man with interests and relationships beyond the political conflicts that surrounded him. Remembering these aspects prevents his identity from being reduced only to the circumstances of his death. Every victim of violence represents a life interrupted, not merely a case file. The murder of Valerio Verbano also raises broader questions about the meaning of justice. A conviction is one of the clearest forms of accountability available within a legal system. It provides an official recognition of responsibility and establishes a record of what happened. When a conviction does not occur, the consequences extend beyond the courtroom. Families continue living with unanswered questions. Communities continue debating unresolved events. Historical understanding remains incomplete. The Verbano case demonstrates how the absence of a final judgment can become a lasting part of a society's memory. It reminds us that some investigations do not end with answers. Some remain open, carried forward by those who continue searching for the truth and by those who believe that unresolved cases deserve attention regardless of how much time has passed. More than 40 years after the murder, the essential tragedy remains unchanged. Valerio Verbano was a young man whose life ended inside his own home. His parents survived the attack, but carried the pain of losing their son without ever knowing who was responsible. Investigators followed leads, examined evidence, considered claims of responsibility, and pursued possible connections, yet no individual was convicted. The case remains one of Italy's most famous unsolved political murders. But the endurance of Valerio Verbano's name shows that a person's significance is not determined only by whether justice reaches a courtroom conclusion. His memory has continued because people continue to ask questions, continue to study the past, and continue to believe that understanding matters. The story of Valerio Verbano is ultimately a story about the relationship between memory and truth. Memory preserves what happened and prevents victims from disappearing into statistics or historical summaries. Truth remains the goal that investigations pursue, even when it proves difficult to reach. Between those two ideas exists the long, unfinished journey of the Verbano case. The identity of those responsible remains unknown in legal terms. But the importance of remembering the victim remains clear. The final answer may still be missing, but the responsibility to continue seeking understanding has never disappeared. Valerio Verbano's story remains a reminder that time can pass, evidence can be lost, and investigations can become complicated. Yet the search for truth remains a fundamental part of justice. Some stories end when the final question is answered. A suspect is identified, a courtroom reaches a decision, and history records a clear conclusion. The story of Valerio Verbano does not belong to that category. More than 4 decades after the events of February 22, 1980, the case remains defined by the space between what is known and what remains hidden. It is a story in which the facts of the crime are clear. Yet the identity of those responsible has never been established through a judicial verdict. It is a story in which an investigation produced theories, evidence, and years of effort, but never the final certainty required by the law. And it is a story in which the memory of a young man has endured despite the absence of the answers that so many hoped would one day arrive. The murder of Valerio Verbano continues to represent one of the most painful examples of an unresolved political crime in Italy. It is remembered not only because of the brutality of the attack, but because of the circumstances surrounding it. The attackers did not encounter Valerio in a public confrontation. They came to his home. They entered through deception. They turned a place associated with family and safety into the location of a carefully planned ambush. They waited for him. They knew that eventually he would return. And when he did, the confrontation ended with his death. That element remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. A person's home is usually considered a place of protection. a private space separated from the dangers of the outside world. For Valerio, however, that boundary was destroyed. The violence of the attack crossed directly into his family's personal life. His parents were not merely witnesses to the aftermath of a crime. They were trapped within the crime itself, restrained and unable to protect their son as events unfolded only a short distance away. The tragedy of that afternoon cannot be separated from the human reality behind the investigation. Before he became a symbol, before his name appeared in historical discussions and political debates, Valerio was an 18-year-old young man with ordinary interests and personal dreams. He enjoyed photography, practiced martial arts, listened to music, followed AS Roma, and lived within a family environment shaped by its own experiences and beliefs. His political activity was one part of his identity, but it was not the entirety of who he was. This distinction is important because history often transforms individuals into symbols. Once a person becomes connected to a major event, their individual characteristics can become overshadowed by the larger issues surrounding their death. In Valerio's case, discussions about extremism, political violence, and the years of lead sometimes risk replacing the memory of the person himself. Yet the most fundamental truth remains simple. A young man lost his life before he had the opportunity to experience the future that should have been his. The years following the murder were marked by a long search for answers. Investigators examined the evidence available to them. They followed different leads. They considered the claims of responsibility that emerged immediately after the killing. They examined testimony from individuals connected in various ways to the political networks of the period. They attempted to determine who had carried out the attack and why. But investigations are limited by the evidence they possess. In the Verbano case, several elements that might have played a role in future inquiries became unavailable over time. The disappearance of much of the Verbano dossier remained one of the most controversial issues connected with the case. The dossier represented years of Valerio's own efforts to document far-right networks in Rome. It contained photographs, addresses, telephone numbers, relationship maps, and information concerning hundreds of individuals connected to extremist circles. After it was confiscated during the 1979 police search, much of it disappeared before portions later resurfaced. The disappearance of the dossier became symbolic of the wider difficulties surrounding the investigation. It represented the loss of information that had once existed but could no longer be fully examined. The same problem affected physical evidence. Objects recovered from the crime scene, including the suppressed .38 caliber handgun, became central parts of the investigation. Yet later, when renewed examination was requested, the weapon was no longer available. The possibility of using future forensic methods on that evidence disappeared along with the evidence itself. These losses did not erase the crime. They did not change what happened inside the apartment on Via Monte Bianco, but they changed what could be proven. That distinction is at the heart of many unresolved cases. The truth of an event and the ability to establish legal responsibility are connected, but they are not identical. A crime may have occurred beyond doubt while the evidence needed to identify the perpetrator disappears. The conflicting claims of responsibility added another layer of complexity. On the day of a murder, different groups made statements regarding the attack. A far-left group claimed that the death had occurred accidentally during an attempt to punish Valerio because he was allegedly believed to be an informer. Later, Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, a far-right organization, also claimed responsibility and reportedly included details about the weapon used that had not yet been publicly released. However, later denials and contradictions prevented these statements from becoming a definitive resolution. For investigators, claims of responsibility are always complicated. A statement can contain genuine information, deliberate deception, or political motives unrelated to the truth. Without independent evidence confirming such claims, they cannot automatically establish guilt. In the Verbano case, these conflicting declarations became another unanswered question rather than the solution many hoped they would provide. Witness testimony also reflected the difficulties of investigating politically sensitive crimes. One witness initially reported seeing 3 suspects near the crime scene and helped investigators create suspect sketches. This appeared to provide a possible path forward. However, the witness later withdrew the statement, reportedly because of fear of retaliation. Once again, an important element of the investigation became weakened by circumstances beyond the control of those seeking answers. The passage of time created additional obstacles. Memories change. People disappear. Documents become harder to locate. Physical evidence may no longer exist. Each passing year increases the difficulty of reconstructing events that were already complex from the beginning. Yet despite these challenges, the name of Valerio Verbano continued to be remembered. His story became part of the broader conversation about Italy's years of lead and the unresolved crimes left behind by that period. The era was defined by violence between opposing extremist movements and by a climate in which political conflict frequently moved beyond debate into physical confrontation. Valerio's murder became one of the many tragedies associated with that historical moment. But it also became one of the cases whose unanswered questions continued to capture public attention. The annual commemorations held in his name demonstrate the continuing importance of memory. Each February 22nd, people gather to remember what happened and to express the belief that unresolved cases should not disappear simply because time has passed. These gatherings represent more than remembrance of a single event. They represent a broader commitment to confronting difficult parts of history. Memory serves a different purpose from investigation. An investigation seeks evidence and legal conclusions. Memory preserves the human meaning of what occurred. It ensures that victims remain more than names and documents. In the case of Valerio Verbano, memory keeps attention focused not only on the unanswered questions, but also on the life that existed before the tragedy. There is a temptation when discussing unsolved crimes to focus entirely on mystery. Unknown perpetrators, missing evidence, and unanswered questions naturally attract attention. But the center of every such story should remain the person whose life was taken. The mystery surrounding Valerio's murder should never overshadow the reality that he was a son, a friend, and a young person whose future ended violently. The absence of a conviction remains one of the defining features of the case, but does not define the entirety of Valerio's legacy. His name continues to be associated with efforts to remember victims of political violence and to preserve historical awareness. Public places, commemorations, and activities connected with his name reflect the continuing impact of his story. The question that has remained for decades is simple: who killed Valerio Verbano? Yet behind that question are many others. Who organized the attack? Who entered the apartment? Who fired the fatal shot? Why did important evidence disappear? Why did the investigation never reach a final judicial conclusion? These questions remain because the case has never provided the answers needed to close them. But the continued existence of those questions also explains why the story has endured. An unresolved case can become part of a society's conscience. It can serve as a reminder that justice is not only about reaching conclusions, but also about preserving the search for truth. The story of Valerio Verbano remains unfinished, not because nothing is known, but because what is known has never been enough to answer everything. The facts of his final moments are established. The tragedy experienced by his family is undeniable. The impact of his death on Italian memory is clear. Yet the identities of those responsible remain beyond the reach of a judicial verdict. More than 40 years later, the the shadow of that afternoon still remains. It remains in the questions that have never been answered. It remains in the memories of those who continue to commemorate him. It remains in the history of a country that continues to examine the violence of its past. But perhaps the most important thing that remains is the memory of Valerio himself. Not only the victim of an unsolved assassination, not only a name connected with one of the darkest periods in modern Italian history, but a young man whose life mattered, whose future was taken away, and whose story continues to be told because forgetting would mean allowing the unanswered questions to become permanent silence. The search for truth may remain unfinished, but the responsibility to remember is not. And as long as Valerio Verbano's name continues to be spoken, the story of what happened on Via Monte Bianco will remain alive, a reminder that some cases are never truly closed, because the demand for truth does not disappear with time.